Hello, everyone. You're listening to the I Go with Ego podcast, bringing you guests with first-hand experience in studying abroad and seizing personalities excelling in the workforce. We want you to own your journey and be the best you can be. Now presenting your host, Ego Kelly Ekakite.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the I Go with Ego podcast. I am super excited. I have a wonderful guest here, Jaylin. Jay, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's great. Thank you for accepting my invitation. It means a lot to me and it means a lot to everyone on the team. So thank you again.
Of course.
Could you tell us or my audience anything about you, where you come from, or something exciting about you?
Yeah. So I guess my origin story is I was born and raised in a small township just outside of Detroit, Michigan, named Ypsilanti. Ypsi has my heart and soul. It's where I learned what to do, what not to do. I learned about community. I learned about the essence of family and friendship there. And eventually my family made the decision to move completely down south from Michigan to Texas. And that's where I graduated from high school. And I did my undergrad at the University of Texas in San Antonio, where I studied global affairs. And now I'm currently on the East Coast, where I'm at the University of Pennsylvania, studying international development. So been, here and there, but I'd say my story has been marked a lot by community and real relationships. So I'm excited to be here with you in this podcast, and what you're doing is really spectacular. So happy to keep the conversation going.
Well, thank you so very much. It means a lot to me. Thank you. All right, it's Black History Month. It's Black History Month. That's why I have you here, to tell us, what does Black History Month mean to you? Yeah,
this is a loaded question for me because it means so much, right?
True.
As an African American, so I guess my family background, my mother's family is originally from Louisiana, so there's a Creole side there. And my father's family's got deep Native American roots. And it's funny because we all come from these different sort of diverse intersections of life, but we all meet and identify as Black men and women. And I think that's what this month really reminds me of. It reminds me that Black people come in all different colors, shapes, sizes. We come from different places. I'm sure that transition being from Africa here, you start to realize, oh, wow, here people see me Black,
True.
So, we're all in this melting pot together.
Absolutely.
And I really love this month because for me, it's really a year by year thing. I don't think I ever just celebrate it during the month, but I love this month because it gives us an opportunity to think about a different perspective on American history, because I always say American history is Black history. And so it provides our kids, our parents, the elderly a moment to just recognize and appreciate all those who've come before, all those who are working now and in the generation to come. And so I'm really proud of Black History Month because people usually give us their time of day. But I'm really hoping that this month really transcends beyond just this time for this generation.
True.
Because it's really something unique that lies within Black history and culture.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I learned so much coming to America. First of all, I didn't know about Madam C.J. Walker being the first millionaire, a Black person. I didn't know about Black Wall Street ever in Tulsa, Oklahoma then, So coming here from Africa has taught me so much about Black Americans and the history and the culture, so rich. And I'm like, what, it's this, you guys have been through a lot and we have to celebrate every single day, as Black History Day, honestly. For most Black Americans, everyone seems to feel that they've been left out by the government and left out by the leaders that they have. So what challenges do Black Americans still face today, looking at all we've been through and the history we have?
Yeah, of course. I'd say that this may look different depending on who you are, what Black person you are. For the Black woman who's growing up and learning right now that she's still in a time where she's been given her rights constitutionally, but still is neglected by society, whereas her, 97 cents is only compared to a man still $1.50, right? Like she's still ducked down. Or you may be the African-American male who, recognizes that even in this world where we can see someone like a President Obama, I still have to claw my way just to be admitted into a prestigious university. So I think that with the day and age, it's always key to remind ourselves that the struggle for civil rights wasn't that long ago. In fact, the 60s was just yesterday. And I feel like a lot of the pressures we, face today are just debris from the big collision that happened then. And so now we're trying to find out, how can we clean up? How can we really go through our government, go through our constitution, go through these different things that weren't built to serve us and reform them. And for some things, destroy them. So this generation has proposed a lot. We've just in this past year, I know it's been crazy. Like we saw the police brutality come out a lot. We saw, more cases and more incarceration of Black and brown youth. We've seen an increase in sexual assault cases dealing with women of color. And all across the country, I feel like there's just this overwhelming pressure on Black people. And, I don't think that that's going to lighten up anytime soon, but I do think it's a good thing. And I say that because it means that we're moving somewhere, right? Like no diamond begins a diamond. It has to go through, certain things in order to get to that state. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thankful for all the activists, for the frontline workers, for men like President Obama, but also the men on the janitorial level, who are working to maintain, the men who are building that go unnoticed. They're all a part of the fabric that we call America. And so the struggles, they change for everyone. For me, they may look different than they may for, say my fiance or my parents. But I think that it's not wrong to have those, but we've got to start to ask ourselves, what part do we play in that? And I've sort of started to, think on that. And I know we'll talk a little bit about global affairs and United Nations and stuff. Yeah. But I started to sort of try to configure myself within that. Where do I belong in this narrative of Black history? And I think that that's the question that I should be asking, you should be asking, all the viewers, listening.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all Black at the end of the day, like you said, because I tell people let's say a racist man, whether a white man or whatever, will not listen to my accent before he shoots me if he hates me. Right. So he doesn't want to know if I'm African or African American. As long as you're Black, he wants to do something bad to you. And that's where I call for unity. I call for love among the Black people. I tell them I can never understand your history because I didn't grow up in America. Likewise, you can understand my struggles because you didn't grow up in Africa. So it's two different worlds together. But at the end of the day, what brings us together is the skin color and the motherland. So I'm excited to have you here. Hearing from you and all the experience and the things you've said so far, every Black person ought to be excited to know that, hey, you know what, we're in a new time, we're in a new season, it can only get better. Yeah. Martin Luther King, he's like one of our gold standards in looking at people that want to be like, when they talk about inclusion and equality. So how can we continue in our own lives to begin to push for more inclusion and more equality?
Yeah, and I think Martin Luther King, something unique that I don't think a lot of people recognize, and I have a lot of friends actually from Nigeria, and we have these, discussions because the histories are different, right? But I think something people don't recognize is that in his day, Martin Luther King, he had a lower poll rating than, say, Donald Trump, right? I don't think a lot of people recognize that he wasn't liked. His proposition wasn't one that was favored, right? Like people weren't rallying. What we saw when he gave his "I Have a Dream" speech was a culmination of struggles that led up to that point. But he wasn't the most revered man. And I think when I think about that, I often reflect and I think, I wonder how he must have felt within it, right? Like going through it. And I often think, did he still tell himself before he went to sleep that equality, could happen? Did he still tell himself that this "I have a dream" speech could be a reality? Did he believe the words he preached? And I think that our actions speak louder than our words. And throughout, even to the last moment of his life, he allowed that to lead him. And now we revere those actions decades later. And we see him and we place him on this pedestal, and he's not here to see that, sadly, but, we're here to embrace it. And so when I think about Dr. King, I think about being comfortable with being on the opposite end, of the struggle. Like, I think about being siloed and, having, a belief, having a dream. And maybe some people around me don't believe that dream. And maybe some people aren't buying into it at the moment, but still choosing to persevere. That's what I think about when I think of Dr. King. And that's what I believe that young Black men and women should have the heart of, because we're such a collective nature. You know this, we're on social media nowadays, and we can often, live in this bubble of social media and sort of think, man, everybody thinks the way I do.
Right.
But what we saw in this past election is, no, they don't. There are people who have their own opinions, they have their own thoughts, and you have to be okay with that. You have to learn how to move forward within that. Stick by your guns and continue to move forward, because years from now, there may be a young child learning about you in a history book at a time when no one was on your side. And so I always think about what's the morally just and right thing to do in this situation, and how do I want history to reflect on my record? And that's what guides me, and I believe that that's something good that could guide your viewers as well.
You've heard it from Jay. We're going to short break now. When we come back, we know Jay is served as the 8th Youth Observer to United Nations. When we come back from the short break, he will tell us about his experience with the United Nations and all about UNAUSA. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the short break. We still have my very good friend Jaylene here. Jay, I know you served as the 8th Youth Observer to United Nations, engaging young people in global affairs all around the country. And how was this experience for you?
Yeah, so backtrack actually to my my freshman year of college at UTSA, and I had a meeting with this very tiny fast, she's very quick and super stern lady named Dr. E. And I had just heard about her, right? So her name preceded her. And before I entered her office, I was wondering, what is the hype about this woman? What's going on? What is she about to tell me? So being a freshman, I didn't know what in the world I wanted. So oftentimes I still don't know where I'm headed or where I want. But I entered her office, and it was sort of like this. There's this movie called The Incredibles, and there's this woman there named Edna, and she just spins around in her chair and she just directs everything. And she sort of resembled that in a way that she's just like, okay, I'm Dr. E, tell me your story. And I began to tell my story to this woman that I had no idea who she was. And she just began to take it all in, writing notes. And then she's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. And before I knew it, my entire college career was planned out. And in that office was the first time I actually learned about the Youth Observer position. Yeah. And I knew that I wanted a career in international affairs and diplomacy. And, I presented that to her. But I mean, being from Ypsilanti, a small town, I'm like, and being Black, I mean, you study international relations. There are no Black authors in our major. I mean, we don't really learn about very many people. We read Kissinger or some other folks, and, it's great and all, but there's no Black folks. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is wishful thinking. And she's like, you're not ready yet, but your senior year, you should apply. And my senior year, I finally come around, and I had some amazing experiences working with Global Citizen, Cultural Vistas, did some work abroad. And I, just threw my hat in the ring, and Surprisingly, that summer I was working in Saudi Arabia, of all places, which is saturated with Nigerians, by the way.
Oh yeah, Nigerians are everywhere. Honestly.
Yes, and yes, they are getting that oil money.
Right.
So I was on an oil base working with students, and I was doing my interviews on a different time zone, right? And so I had finally, gotten the notification that I would be selected as a youth observer. And while part of me knew a little bit of what I was entering, I didn't know what I signed up for. So coming all the way from, Dr. E's office my freshman year to this moment, it sort of seemed like an all-encompassing sort of, book, but it had only just begun. And, sort of that UNGA feel is when you really, I say it's like the Youth Observer inauguration, because you're just thrown to the wolves, and, there's heads of state in New York City, there's UNAUSA, different events and stuff. And so experiencing that was a little bit nerve-wracking, not gonna lie, because it was, all coming at you all at once, and they make sure you're fairly booked. But that experience throughout that year, and I started to get used to it. I always say you only get used to the position when it's time to leave. And like by the time I got the hang of it, I was so in love. And these were the highlights of the youth observership. For me, it was meeting the people. So the chapters, meeting students and, the chapter leaders, and just to see how vast the network is. It was really amazing to see all of the Americans, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, who are all identifying as Americans who want to champion the work of the UN. That was inspiring. Also, second was getting to meet different, dignitaries, diplomats, and heads of state. It could seem intimidating, but at the end of the day, they're just people who make decisions, and and they have a hard time doing so. So getting to pull from that tree of wisdom and disseminating that among, the people I've met was really rich. And then the last moment for me was I worked with UNAUSA. Yeah. And so she's actually, when she first called me, her area code was 734. And I was like, that's Ypsilanti, Michigan. Anna and I are from the same place. Right. So that small township. And we just clicked from there. And I said, Anna, what if I did a homecoming tour? What if I went back? Because, a lot of the kids where I'm from don't know about the UN.
True.
And that, getting to host that with my old middle school and elementary school was just so rich, man. Like that was awesome. So all together, all of that to say, it was a rich experience. It was definitely something that transformed my life, and it's really guided me in the direction of where I eventually hope to go one day.
Yeah. As a member of the UNAUSA, I've always admired your works, all through your time. It gave me hope that, we have people there doing great things, and that's what attracted me to you in the first place and all that. So great job. Thank you.
Oh, so much, man.
Why should young Americans support the UN and join UNAUSA?
Yeah. So I think that the purpose of the UN still stands, right? It was created after the Second World War to ensure that, peace and stability will remain throughout the international order. And for some time, it did a great job of doing that. And still today it exists as the forum where most of the world's countries, not all, but most of the world's countries can come together and speak their piece rightfully. And I think that there's no other forum like that. I had an experience where I was in Brooklyn, and there was a group of students from an activist group, and they were asking me very critical questions. One thing as youth observer is everybody's trying to get under your skin at some point in time. And, they were asking me some very tough questions about the United Nations, how they believed that it was inherently corrupt, that, that the system isn't working, nor will it ever work. You have a Security Council who can't ever decide on things. You have 5 nations who just seem to always be at odds. And it's, hearing that come from her, I totally respected the perspective, right? Like, as leaders, we have to learn to accept that there are other perspectives in the world. And so I took it as it is. And I then returned my perspective. And I'll tell you what that was. I said, I asked her simply, I said, well, if there is no UN, how do our countries communicate? How do they talk to one another? And we talked a little bit about, bipartisan diplomatic treaties, different sort of conferences like COP or like the Paris Agreement, these different sort of ordeals. And then I asked her the question, so you'd rather it be just a few countries together than all of them? She says, no, that's not what I mean. I just mean that it needs to be a more effective system. And so I say, okay, I remember the United Nations replaced the League of Nations. So what will be a better system than the United Nations? And, she's found herself stumped at these questions. And my purpose wasn't to try to persuade her, but it was to get her to understand the essence of the UN. And it is not to solve the world's problems.
Nope.
It's to only bring the world together, right? Like, that is a forum for the world to decide what they do. In fact, the United Nations is only as powerful as the member states make it, right? Sure. Countries have to pay its dues in order for the lights to continue running at the UN. They have to participate in order for the Security Council to happen. So really, it's just a participatory organization. So really, the establishment itself has no authority, no rule, no power outside of the countries that make it, right? So then I told her, our best interest is to tell our government to continue in this forum. And that brings me to UNAUSA. It's one of the first organizations, I believe, advocating for the UN at the US level. It is the oldest. And, at its creed and its founding, it was meant with the purpose of making sure that Americans not only knew what the UN was, but that they understood that our participation is vital, and now that we have a new administration, I'm sort of hopeful for our diplomatic record to increase, for our allies to come together around the issues that truly matter. And I think that, I won't say that was completely absent in the last administration, but I do think that we confuse the UN a lot with being an organization that fixes all the world's problems.
True.
Yeah, and they just sadly can't do that. But UNAUSA is there to provide people like you and I with the opportunity to speak about why we should continue at that forum, to continue participating. And that's why I love the group.
Absolutely. I remember when I walked the halls of the UN, there's a big caption that says, the United Nations was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save mankind from hell. So it was the former UN president that said, I can't remember his name, but they can't solve all the world's problem, but they can find a common ground between nations to accept each other, sign treaties, come to an agreement, and of course, avoid nuclear World War III. We don't want that. What's next for you? In the next 5 years, 10 years, what's next?
Yeah, I think that I've been weighing heavily on that and not taking it lightly. And honestly, in this process of deciding where I want to head, I want to give encouragement to the listeners as well that, it's okay not to know what you want to do, right? We don't have to have our story planned out.
True.
I always like to refer back to my, history over my life. Nothing, in fact, that I've ever planned has come to fruition. Everything that I've gone through has been by complete accident or just because, I say, God's directing my path, and so for me, it's trusting in, trusting and believing in what I can't see and knowing that greater is, ahead of us, not just for me, right? In the spirit of Black History Month, we have to remember that what we do today impacts the young Black boys and girls, whether they're born here in Africa, wherever, later on. And so I've got to think about them too. So of course I'm thinking about how do I sustain life, like what pays, right? Talking about UN internships is a whole nother story.
Tell me about it.
Right.
I know.
So it's thinking about what sustains, but also where do you want to leave your mark? And I think that that's a difficult question because we often think that we have to leave it somewhere in specific, but you can leave it in the human rights area. You can leave it in the television and media arts area. Who says that we have to be siloed and, be complete monoliths? We can do multiple things as long as, the late Chadwick Boseman said in a speech, he's like, it's better that you find a purpose than a career. And for me, that's what I'm trying to find every day. And it's building itself out. So hopefully 5 years or 10 years from now, I'll have a definite answer for you.
Nice. Well, if there's anyone rooting for you, I am rooting for you. I know you're going to do great things. I can't wait. All right, before I let you go, because I know it's been a while, I know you're a gifted singer. And you are a fine player of the keyboard. And you know how to sing that the heavens can come down. Let's just say that. Do you want to do a freestyle for us today? That's a freestyle. Let's see.
Oh man, I don't know. What's your favorite song? I'll let's see. I don't know. I'm not really good with
let's say "Lean on Me."
Okay. Okay. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on.
You see what I said? Absolutely. Thank you. That was wonderful, Jay.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'm grateful. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Jay. You see why I brought him in. He's a vast wealth of resource. He's a wonderful person. He has a kind heart, and he's absolutely intelligent. That's what I love about him. He knows what he says, and he means what he says too. So thank you, Jay. Thank you for honoring my invitation. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank y'all for listening.
Thank you. Well, please don't forget to follow us on all social media at I Go With Ego, and please share this podcast with family and friends, and please stay safe out there. There's still COVID. Wear your mask, social distance, and try and be the best you can be. Have a wonderful time. Thank you.